what a wild weekend of college football. I mean, BYU playing against Cincinnati was certainly the most important game because it had affected how the entire league was going to play out. But the Utah game had to be one of the wildest games that we've seen locally ever. And I'm not grandiose statement guy. Wild.
I've been wrestling with this, since the game went final on Saturday of just where does this game rank? Certainly as far as importance go, it's not that high. It really doesn't matter that much other than there's a potential that it was Witt's final home game. Then that part of it is probably the signature aspect of it. It's not some of those Utah-Oregon matchups. It's certainly not Cam Rising punching in the two-point conversion against USC. It's not Utah, Oregon State, or TCU in those big games in 2008 in that undefeated season. But, man, you're right. It was just absolutely one of the most entertaining, probably maddening games if you're a Utah fan. It will stand out. It will be one of the games that we talk about for the next decade plus.
I'm glad that's kind of the comparison game, which I often like to do. I'm kind of glad that's where you went. So let me run this by you because I've been thinking about that as well. I think it's the combination of two games. Okay. Mm-hmm. One, I think it reminded me a lot of the UCLA game a few years ago, the Joe Williams game, where he ran it for 300 yards and was just it was one of the most amazing performances I've ever seen. But what we forget about that game was a fairly average UCLA offense was just carving up Utah somehow. Mm-hmm. Out of the blue, you would never have predicted it or seen it coming. And all of a sudden, UCLA is unstoppable, so much so that it required Joe Williams to have a historic performance. So it's the combination of that game, Ben, and maybe we should get hands-on to talk about this. I wonder what his opinion would be. But Lavelle Edwards' last game his last game ever at Rice-Eccles Stadium. Might have still been Rice Stadium. I can't remember. But his last game, I don't know if you remember how wild that was and took crazy plays from Brandon Doman for BYU. I mean, BYU basically willed themselves to victory because they weren't going to let Lavelle Edwards finish one under 500 and two with a loss to Utah. That was and again, I'd love to talk to Hans about what the locker room was like in that particular game, but the team, the players were not going to let that game be lost. Yeah. You know what I mean? Or at least it had that vibe. So it's some sort of combination of those two because the wildness of the game, even though it wasn't that important, was kind of like that UCLA game, which really wasn't that important, but was just a super wild game.
To a point where everyone remembers it, and not just because Joe Williams. Or maybe it is just because Joe Williams ran for 300 yards. It was.
But the nature of the game was weird because it wasn't Utah's traditional defensive performance. I mean, we were talking about it the Monday after, going, God, what happened to the defense? It just gave way. I mean, they were lucky Joe Williams. They pulled off the couch. That was a wild thing. But then also, I don't think Utah, it had the vibe where they weren't, I don't know if behind the scenes Witt's talked about retiring or what, or where that decision lies, but it felt to me like that was a team that wasn't going to let their coach lose the last home game.
I certainly thought they were going to lose. I did
too,
lose.
But you know what I mean? If you would rewatch that BYU-Utah game, Lavelle's last game, you would have thought BYU is dead in the water.
Yeah. And
then somehow, not to steal Austin Colley's phrase, but magic happens.
Yep.
And all of a sudden, Lavelle goes out with a W. It had that vibe to me because, I thought they were going to lose too. And to run back in it, which is crazy, and talk about playing to your strengths. I mean, Utah did all of that and didn't go away and didn't give up. And, rewarded with a victory, I suppose.
I'm sure, like a lot of Utah fans, I was looking at this game with, certainly after the Devon Dampier fumble late in the fourth quarter, and even a little bit before that when he was just throwing behind guys and just had not, he had the nice throw too. It was at Bentley for the touchdown in the first half, or early in the second half. But man, he's missed a lot of throws. And I just got to the point where we talked a lot about, do you choose Byrd or do you choose Devon Dampier going forward? And I just thought, man, can Utah play Devon Dampier the rest of the season? Byrd had been better in this game in his limited opportunities. I'm not sure he's going to throw the ball a whole lot worse than Devon Dampier is going to, if worse at all, if not just better. And he's so dynamic with his legs. He is such a game breaker with his legs. And it's not just, he hits the hole and he's gone. I mean, he is dragging guys in the end zone, which we saw over and over against Kansas State. And they just stuck with Dampier. And I was thinking, this is a weird move for Utah. And it proved to be absolutely right, because you ended up needing the best two sequences of football we've seen from Devon Dampier so far this season on the final two drives, which were making a couple of big throws. Obviously, the huge run, which actually, if it was Byrd, the ironic thing is if Byrd breaks that run on 4th and 1, he scores because he's faster than Dampier, and he trots into the end zone, and Kansas State gets the ball back with 2 minutes and 15 seconds left or whatever and has a much better chance to score. Actually, I think Devon Dampier being a little bit hobbled and getting dragged out of bounds at the 4-yard line or whatever it was ended up really helping Utah. But it was really impressive. And this is a lot of what we talked about on Friday. Who's more likely to lose this game? And I had said Utah because I thought if Kansas State were to jump on them, I didn't know if Utah were going to be able to come back.
You didn't predict that
they
were going to shred the defense.
14-0 in the first quarter, and I thought, can Utah overcome a 14-point deficit in the first quarter? Utah overcame what was borderline. What was it going to be, 12? Had they converted the 2-point conversion? No, it would have been 14 had they converted the 2-point conversion. They were up 12. And Utah runs it back, and it's 10, and all of a sudden, it still felt like Utah was dead in the water to me, and they find a way. So extraordinarily impressive from Utah. An incredibly entertaining game. Rewarded the fans who hung around. I know Whit talked about that after the game as well. And it's what you're a fan for. Those are the types of games. I was on social media. I wasn't up at the game, but I was watching everyone and kind of putting their aw shucks, hands in their pockets, head down, feeling bad about this Utah team to come back in the final, what is that? 250 seconds of the game was truly extraordinary, and tip of the cap to Devon Dampier and Jason Beck, who I thought was not moving the ball quick enough on that second to last drive. I think a lot of fans saw that. I thought they handled their timeouts exactly right. So they did what I did not know if or didn't think they could do.
And not in the way that has traditionally done it either, which, again, stick to your identity. It was.
And Dampier did make two really good throws.
And
the two throws to Simmons were really good throws, both of them.
And I have certainly I have thoughts on Dampier, but honestly, Kansas State should be so embarrassed to rush for 472 yards and lose is wild. I would love to see the chart on that. If you run for 472 yards, your percentage of winning the game has got to be
it's
like
440 and 1, and the one is what happened at Kansas State.
It's absolutely wild. And I know that Kleinman was emotional after the game, and he's feeling the heat in Manhattan and all that stuff. But like, how do you lose when you run the ball for 472 yards against a defense that probably doesn't know what to do in that case, because it so rarely happens? We could probably list off the games Utah got run over on the ground over the last 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
We could.
Arizona game a few years ago at Rice Eccles.
It's like 10 of them. Oregon did it to them a couple of times. 10 at the most.
Yeah, it's not a lot. Not in the Whit era.
No. And the Whit era has gone on for 20 years.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, it's not what happens to them, and how they still end up losing that game is absolutely wild. But as far as Dampier goes, listen, there is a gamer aspect of football, and there is a trust between coaching staff and certain players that does matter. And I will always point to, I mean, I think Cam Rising kind of falls into this category too, but I'll always point to Brian Johnson, who in 2007, when he played hurt, and also in 2008, was a very limited physical quarterback. His shoulder was a mess. He couldn't throw it, 30 yards downfield. He wasn't the fastest anymore because I think his knee had been wrecked twice or something like that. He just wasn't a physically dynamic quarterback. You could have found a much more physical specimen. But you know what you could do? Trust him always. And he was going to go out there and win it. And Dampier, hasn't had that the entire season, but he certainly had that against Kansas State. And
he hasn't been behind all that much. He hasn't had to have that gamer moment very often. He didn't do it against BYU. He kind of did. I mean, they led the drive and then couldn't get a stop against Bear Bachmeier, and credit BYU and Bear for getting the game-winning drive late against Utah. and they couldn't move the ball in the fourth quarter at all against Texas Tech. That was an issue, But no, he hadn't had this opportunity to do this very often. So credit him for doing it. This is the first time he's had to do it this year, and he showed up.
And as far as his passing goes, listen, he's just not the most accurate guy. You mentioned his good passes, and they were good passes. But I hope people understand. I'm certainly never comparing myself to Devon Dampier, but I had accuracy issues when I was a pitcher, and it's like, yeah, I get it right where I want it to go. Once in a while, it happens because I'm not completely inept, which I don't think Dampier is, but he's got accuracy issues, plain and simple. That's down the field, we saw it even with short passes and things. He's just got accuracy
He doesn't have great
issues.
touch. Yeah, he doesn't.
But there's other ways to impact the ball game, and that's why he was brought to Utah. And those other ways won him a crazy game. I mean, won him a wild game. And Byrd deserves credit. Byrd 3 touchdowns on the ground. I mean, you couldn't have written this script. It would be impossible. I give you credit for saying that Kansas State was going to give Utah problems, but I don't think you would say, well, Jake, they're going to run for pretty much 500 yards,
almost 1,000 yards.
Now, why we're talking about Utah, and we will get to BYU again, the more important game from a conference standpoint, but the officials.
Okay.
I want Utah fans to remember this game. I want Mark Harlan to remember this game where stuff broke their way. And I'm not saying that the officials were right or wrong. You can go nitpick calls online all you want, knock yourself right out. Sometimes stuff goes your way, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the Lakers go to the line 70 times when they're at home, and sometimes they go to the line 40 times when I'm exaggerating, but they went to the line way fewer times the other night. Sometimes it goes your way, sometimes it doesn't. And there are 50-50 iffy calls that can be made on every single play in football. And sometimes they're made, and sometimes they're not. And sometimes it breaks your way, and sometimes it doesn't. And
this game was absolutely stolen from us. We were excited about being in Big 12, but tonight I am not.
No, I wanted Harlan to kick in the door and go, I'm fired up about being in the Big 12 tonight.
Yeah.
Woo! Yeah, doggy.
I wasn't happy about being in this conference a year ago, but tonight I am.
I'm fired up. Every 50-50 shot went our way.
It did.
Whew.
Even just picked up some flags.
Yeah.
Even just picked up a couple of flags that were on the ground.
Well, even benefiting from dreadful Kansas State decisions. That might have been the most egregious targeting, head-to-head contact,
that first
late
drive,
hit.
That first drive was bizarre. That was so bizarre from Kansas.
That was the worst
State.
penalty in the history of football. So anyway, my point is, remember this game next time it doesn't go your way, because sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't.
I agree. I don't think the refs stole this game from Kansas State. The same way I didn't think the refs stole the game from Utah last year at home against BYU.
Well, you did kind of defend Harlan. So.
I said I loved that he did that because how many times have we played that drop now? 400? We've played it every day since it happened?
I don't think that was your reasoning at the time, but yeah, I get your point.
I said, absolutely, you should do it. It's great radio. It's great for us. I said, I wish more people would do it and give us more good radio.
Oh, man.
Anyways, neither here nor there. It was
such a freaking bozo.
It was an incredible win from Utah. And no, it's not the most important win of the weekend, but it was the most surprising on so many fronts. We had not seen Devon Dampier do this type of stuff. We had not seen Utah's defense play this poorly. For it to be likely, it feels like Kyle Whittingham's last game at Rice-Eccles Stadium, certainly from the emotion he had after the game.
Yeah, the post-game felt like it, didn't it?
It certainly had that feel. And, despite the fact that he's lost to BYU 3 times in a row and Utah's not going to win the Big 12 and probably not going to the college football playoff, if he wanted to end it here, I still think this is a very respectable place to walk out and still say, you're walking out as close to on top as you can probably get.